Hello everyone, greetings from PayTap's technical support team. In this series, you will learn how to integrate with PayTaps through our PT2 API endpoints. Throughout the series, we will walk you through the second integration type, which is the invoices. And for the purpose of this series, we have created a very simple Laravel project to walk you through the integration process. But feel free to follow the steps in this series with your own project, whatever the programming language or the frameworks used to integrate with PayTaps. So, let's get started. In this video, we are going to initiate our first invoice using the require parameter, and we are going to learn more about the minimum required parameters and their details to initiate any invoice. So, let's get started. Before we start, the first thing you should know is that you can find the full documentation for this part inside PayTap support portal under the article called the Invoices APIs Integration Manual. Now, if we navigated to step 3 over here, initiating the payment, and then inside part 2, initiate the payment, we will find that we have two endpoints that we can use to initiate an invoice. One is the invoice endpoint, and the other one is the payment endpoint. Throughout this series, we will be relying on the invoice endpoint as it is the main endpoint to use our invoices, but we will create a video in this series that will guide you through what is the payment endpoint and what is its differences. For now, let's just initiate our payment using the invoice endpoint. Now, normally in this solution article, you will find all the details you want. You will find the endpoint, of course. You will find how you can get the domain by clicking here. You will find the minimum required parameter, the request payload, the response payload, and all the available optional parameters. Now, as we said, we just want to learn more about the minimum required parameter to initiate an invoice. So, if we take a look at this request payload over here, we can see the minimum required parameters to initiate an invoice. Now, these minimum required parameters are the profile ID, the transaction type, the transaction class, the card currency, the card amount, card ID, card description, and of course the invoice object which identifies the invoice request payload. And inside the invoice object, the minimum required objects are the line item, and we need at least one line item, and we need at least the unit cost for this line item. Now, these are the required parameters, and let's learn more about them one by one. If we navigate to the table over here, we will find that each parameter had its own detail inside the table, and also if you clicked on the parameter like that, you will be redirected to a fully dedicated solution article that will guide you through all the details you need to know about this parameter. Now, let's get back to the main table. The first parameter, which is the profile ID, is the merchant profile ID which you can get from your merchant dashboard over here. Now, there's different types of profile, which is the test profile and the live profile, and also you can see these differences inside the profile ID solution article. Now, for the second two parameters, which are the transaction type and the transaction class, these are the parameters that identify the type of the transaction. So, for example, the transaction types is the type of the transaction, and to learn more about the different types, we have a solution article called over here, What is Transaction Type? Now, mainly we have multiple transaction types like sale, auth, capture that we are going to learn more about throughout the series, but if you want to learn more about them, you can check the solution article. Now, in this video, we are going to initiate a sale transaction, and a sale transaction is one of the simplest transactions to initiate. Simply, you are directly dedicating the amount from the customer. There is another way, of course, of dedicating the amount of the customer, which is authorizing a payment, then capture it by yourself through an API. So, again, if you want to learn more about these transaction types, you can check our solution article, What is Transaction Type? If we get back over here to our main table to learn more about the transaction class, you will see that these are also our way of identifying the transaction and the type of it and the class of it. And mainly we have only 2 or 3 classes, and you can learn more about them inside our solution article, What is Transaction Class? And what we are going to use normally is the ecom class, which is the class made for the normal transaction. There is another transaction class that we are going to learn about, which is the recurring for the let's say, getting money from your client without giving them a payment page, meaning directly or merchant side dedicating the money. Now, for now, we are going to use the ecom transaction class, of course, and let's get back to our details. And for the next couple of parameters, these are the card details. Now, the card details identify the amount, the card ID, the currency of the transaction. Now, these are very sensitive details. So, we don't highly recommend you to send it through your front end or through any visible way. So what we normally do is that we, instead of sending from my front end all the card details, we send only an ID like a product ID or something like that. And from my back end, I'd be getting all the card details like the card amount or the card currency and sent it to pay tabs inside the request. Now, for the card details, we have mainly card ID, we have card description for the description and the ID, of course, and we have card currency, which is a required parameter that you need to fill in a currency that is configured in your PayTabs profile only. You can't use any currency, of course. The card amount is the amount that will be deducted or the transaction amount. These are the main transaction required parameter. Now the other required parameter for the invoice are the invoice object, of course, and as we clarified before, the line items object, and of course at least one line item need to be sent, and at least a unit cost for this line item should be sent, or must actually be sent. Now you may seem that these are not much parameters, but in the next videos we are going to learn more about the optional parameter, which will give you multiple options for the invoice object itself, for the line item object itself, different optional parameter that will empower your invoices. Now we just want to learn about the required parameters, so let's get started. We are going to get back over here to our code and see the final required parameter that we have created. So this is the profile ID, of course, I'm getting it from my environment file, and from my transaction type and transaction class, I'm getting it from my configuration file over here. You will see this is the transaction type, I give it the value of sale. This is the transaction class, I give it the value of ecom. And for my card ID, card currency, card amount, and card description, I am getting it from my request. And if you remember, the request will be sent through this visible UI over here. So these details I'm getting from my request and I'm filling that over here. And in the request also I'm sending the line item details in a sort of array. Then I'm looping over this array and putting it inside the line item array and just passing it to my invoice object that looks like this. So this is a simple required parameters. Let's get back to our code over here. Actually, we don't need to fill out all of these customer details or shipping details. We are going to learn about them in the next video. I can simply choose pay tabs and I click submit like that. Then, as you can see, I'll be redirected to an invoice, and you will see over here that I have the unit cost from my invoice and the total amount will be displayed over here once I click pay. But what I want you to learn more about is once I have initiated the invoice, if I navigate it to my merchant dashboard over here and inside invoices, I will see that a new invoice has been created. As you can see, this is the amount over here, the total amount. This is the invoice ID over here, and as you can see, a new invoice has been actually created in my dashboard, and I can still use this invoice through my dashboard over here. I can still send it, manage it totally through my dashboard, but for now we just want to learn how we can use it through my APIs. So back to my payment over here, as you can see, I have redirected this link, which is the invoice link, to my client. Once the client click pay now over here, he will be redirected to the payment page. He will be able to fill out his card details. In the next videos, we will learn how we can send the customer and the shipping details inside the request so that your client does not need to fill out these details. And of course, if he wants to take another look at the invoice, we will have a look at it by clicking over here like that. And once he paid it out, let's fill out the details. These are my test card. and I'm going to fill my customer details like that. Shipping will be same as billing. And once I click pay now, you can see the transaction is successful. If we get back over here to my invoice, if you see this, you can see that the status of it is pending. Now once I reload, you will see that the invoice is now paid and an associated transaction has been created. I can see it from over here, and here is the transaction. Here's all the detail. This is the cart ID, the card description, the invoice ID, and now we have initiated and fulfilled and paid a successful invoice. Now, again, what I'm going to do this time, I'm going to initiate the invoice, but this time, let's get back to my code over here. This time I want to show you the exact request that I have sent to PayTaps. I'm going to get back over here, and if you remember over here, I am sending the request inside my trade, my send request trade. I am giving my endpoint from here, which is the invoice endpoint. I am using it over here to send my request like that, client request post URL. Here is the URL I'm getting from my configuration. Now what I want to do is, just before I am sending all of these details, I'm going to die and debug my payload, which is the data variable, to take a look and see how does it look just before it's sent to PayTaps, in order for you to see the exact request payload. Now I'm going to, again, let's make sure that I have saved. I'm going to submit, and here comes the request payload. You can see this, the profile ID, transaction type, transaction class, cart ID, cart currency, cart amount, card description, the invoice object, and inside it you can see the line item object, and inside the line item object you can see my object, which is the unit cost, and automatically it has been given a quantity of 1, and the same here, it has been given a quantity of 1. I have sent 2 line items, and these are how it looks. Now the last thing I didn't mention, which is the headers. Of course, you need to send your API key along with the request over here. As you can see over here, I am sending the headers, and here it comes inside authorization, and I'm saving my API key inside my environment, and I have just called it over here, and of course I'm getting the domain using the correct domain. And if you want to learn how you can get the domain, you can get back over here inside over here the domain. You can check this solution article, what is my region endpoint URL, and you will find all the domain that you can use inside your endpoints. So this is it. We have initiated a successful invoice. We have learned how it works. We have seen it in the merchant dashboard. Let's move to the next part.